This government is doing it to the British people. High tax, high inflation, low growth, low reform. There's a word for that, Mr. Speaker. It's Starmerism.
Not just me who isn't convinced, Mr. Speaker. The people behind her are not convinced either. And neither are the public. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm not even sure if the Right Honourable Lady herself is convinced. So can I ask her, isn't she just a little embarrassed to be defending policies she doesn't even agree with herself?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if he sort of listened to what I said because I was reading off the script, but what I can tell him, and I don't need the script, we will go ahead on Tuesday.
Well, there you have it, Mr. Speaker. There will be a vote in this House on Tuesday on the welfare bill, although many on the back benches could be forgiven for thinking they've heard this before with the winter fuel payment, where they were marched up the hill, and we all know where that story ended.
After he left 1 in 8 young people out of the economy, he demands no new taxes from the party that raised taxes to record levels, and he demands further welfare savings, Mr. Speaker, from the man who was in charge as the welfare bill absolutely ballooned. They say cut welfare bill, they failed. They say cut people in work, they failed. They say no tax increases, they failed.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the Right Honourable Lady has clearly not read her own legislation. The bill will see the number of people on welfare rising for every single year going forward. There is no commitment from the Right Honourable Lady to cut the number of people on welfare. And even if they manage to deliver these reforms, almost every respected economist now says tax rises are all but inevitable in the autumn. But after the budget, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor said, and I quote, "I'm not coming back for more taxes." Mr. Speaker, British businesses have been hit again and again by Labour's economic mismanagement. They are desperate for certainty. So can the Right Honourable Lady give them that certainty now? The Chancellor's promise not to raise taxes at the budget.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a bit rich. Unbelievable. Inflation above 11%. The biggest tax rises by their party. I take no lectures. And on this issue in particular, Mr. Speaker, they can't make their minds up. First they said our reforms were taking too long. Then they say they were rushed. Then their front bench said our measures were too tough. And now they say they need to be tougher. No plan, no idea. I wonder why their party was left in such a mess.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will have heard that the Right Honourable Lady did not repeat the Chancellor's promise not to raise taxes. And Britain's businesses have today been put on notice. Tax rises are coming. Specifically, in her own area, despite Labour's promises to freeze council tax, the IFS says that the spending review will mean the biggest council tax increases in a generation, a £7 billion tax rise. And yet the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have repeatedly claimed that the government will not raise taxes on working people. So can I ask the Right Honourable Lady, why doesn't she think that council tax is paid by working people?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I think they've got an absolute nerve when council tax rose every single year under their government. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I had to turn down the Tories on the LJ who wanted me to take away the precept to make sure that they could raise taxes above the 5%. We've kept it there, Mr. Speaker, while delivering money for local government where they had austerity.
Mr. Speaker, when you cut out the blather, isn't the reality that this Labour government has condemned us to higher taxes, more debt, borrowing up, unemployment up, inflation up? Yet the Right Honourable Lady tells us the government's plan is working.
Something happened in Parliament today that left the whole House frozen. The kind of moment you could feel in your chest, even if you were watching from home. One question, one attack. And suddenly, Angela Rayner, Labour's fiery deputy leader, was no longer in control. The air turned heavy. The Tory MP across from her locked in like a predator, and Diverii in the chamber waited to see if she would fight back or fall apart. What came next wasn't just a clash, it was a public unraveling, and it said more about Labour's deep cracks than any headline could. It started with the Tory MP standing up.com collected, and wearing the kind of grin you see on Simeon, who knows exactly where the trapdoor is and exactly how to pull Thelevere. The question was simple on their surface, but deadly in its precision. Why was Labour pushing forward a welfare bill that over 100 of their OMPs had signed a letter condemning as risky and wrong? The room shifted. Labour's backbenches stiffened, some glancing away, others smirking bitterly. You could almost hear Thea thought running through their minds. Goon, Angela, explain this one without making it worse. Rayner took a breath, squared her shoulders, and launched into a prepared line about tailored employment support and putting working people first. It might have sounded finetto, the focus group in her head, but in the Commons it landed like a damp McKin, a thunderstorm, fizzled before it could spark. The Tory MP didn't miss a beat. Can the right honourable lady confirm there will actually be a vote on Tuesday? He pressed, twisting the knife. For a moment, Rayner's composure cracked, her eyes darted, her lips tightened. It was the face of someone who knows Theovan's on fire, but is still insistent dinner will be served on time. She said Thea would proceed on Tuesday, but by them the damage was done. The pause, the hesitation, the flicker of panic. It was sino for the entire chamber to wakeness and weakness in the Commons, ice like blood in shark-infested waters. Then came the pivot. The MP moved seamlessly to taxes. He quoted Labour's own "I'm not coming back for more taxes." The chamber hummed with anticipation because everyone knew where this was going. Council tax, that ever unpopular levy, was creeping up under Labour and not by a sliver. Reports from IFS predicted the biggest rise in a generation, £7 billion. That's not just a number. That's a political oathcake. The Tory MP raised an eyebrow almost mockingly and asked Thea, why doesn't she think council tax is paid by working people? That waste trapdoor moment. If she admitted it was, she'd have to explain the rise. If she dodged, she'd look evasive. Rayner, visibly bristling, chose to dodge, firing back with old Tory tax rises, inflation figures, and the usual "we want to take lecture" script. Butavarian could see it. She wasn't winning the argument. She was trying to serve it, and this is where the humiliation deepened. The Tory map-smelling victory lined up the fatal blow. When you cut out the bluster, isn't the reality that this Labour government has condemned us to higher taxes, more debt, fewer jobs, more pain for businesses, and yet you stand there saying it's working? Silence, not just from Rayner but from her own side. Karma wasn't in sight, probably somewhere rehearsing a speech in fiscal credibility, leaving his deputy to take the hits alone. Rayner says hardened, and she reached for Theon card. Labour always plays when corned. Blame the Tories. She rapped A-list. Minimum wage increases, free school meals, affordable housing. Good things, sure, but completely unrelated how the charges against her. It was like being accused of crashing a car and responding with, yes, but look at my lovely garden. Behind her, Labour meeps looked like they'd rather be anywhere. In front of her, the Tory MP basked in the rare satisfaction of dismantling the opposition's second-in-command in real time. This wasn't just a political theatre. It was a public unmasking, because in those moments, Angela Rayner wasn't the fiery nonsense her supporters love. She was a politician on the defensive, cornered by her opponents, undermined by her allies, and exposed to the nation as someone without the answers her party desperately needs. The look on her face said it all. Panic, frustration, and grim knowledge that tomorrow's headlines will be brutal. This was only Theo panning round, but it was enough to make the Commons hum with that rare electric thrill, the sense that something bigger is breaking beneath the surface. And if the first exchange had been this bad, the rest of the session promised to be nothing short of a demolition. The Tory MP, emboldened by the visible cracks in Rayner's defence, pressed harder. His turn now, carrying that deadly combination of mockery and faux concern that can make even the most seasoned politicians squirm. He reminded that chamber and the millions watching at home that the very welfare bill Rayner was defending would tell, according to Labour's own projections. See the number of people on benefits rise every year. This wasn't some opposition spin or tabloid smear. It was written in black and white in the government's own documents. The House rippled with a low murmur. It was the kind of moment where truth doesn't just cut, it exposes. Clearly rattled, tried to regain the upper hand by accusing the Conservatives of hypocrisy, pointing to their own record of cuts and failures. But it was too late. The point had landed. The Tory benches leaned back in satisfaction while the Labour side shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mix of frustration and resignation. The deputy leader's words were tumbling out quickly now, like a boxer throwing wild punches in the hope of keeping the opponent at bay. But her opponent wasn't flinching. He was smiling. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, the mop shifted the attack to Labour's internal fractures. He referenced the letter signed by over 100 Labour MPs opposing the bill, calling it the loudest mutiny Parliament has seen since the Blair. It was a devastating line because UT didn't just make Labour look divided, it made them look unstable. And in politics, instability is poison. Every chimera caught Rayner's jaw tighten. Her gaze flicked momentarily towards the lava benches behind her, where her fumes were clearly enjoying her discomfort a little too much. These weren't just random backbench rebels. These were supposed to be her allies, but at that moment they looked more like spectators at a public execution, quietly pleased that someone else was taking the blows. And then came the calculated insult that hit like a sledgehammer wrapped in silk. The MP, his voice smooth but dripping with contempt, asked, "If Labour can't even unite behind their own deputy in this chamber, how can the country possibly trust them to unity behind her policies and government?" The pause that followed was deafening. No one shouted, no one jeered. It was a second of silence that says, "He's right, and everyone knows it." Rayner's cheeks flushed, but she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She responded with a flurry of statistics about job creation, investment in public services, and tackling inequality. But none of it addressed the core question. She wasn't answering. She was performing damage control. And in the Commons, damage control rarely works when the is still bleeding. Across their chamber, the Tory MPs were visibly enjoying the spectacle. Every time Rayner tried to pivot, the MP reeled her back in like an angler playing a fish that's already on the hook. He pointed out the councillor's refusal to repeat her "Oh no more taxes" pledge, reminding everyone thought council tax rises were already set in motion under Labour. He talked to booth working people. Labour claims to champion being squeezed harder than ever and accused the government of breaking its promises within months of taking office. This wasn't just police critique, it was a character assassination in real time. And Rayner, for all her firebrand image, was looking more and more like a politician caught without her armour. But perhaps the most brutal moment came when the MP, his voice dropping just enough to make the chamber lean in, and said, "Deputy Leader, do you understand why the public no longer believe you? You promised change. You promised fairness, but all you've delivered is more taxes, more debt, and more division. Even in your own party." The words hung in Thea, sharp and heavy. Ree tried to laugh it off, shaking her head and delivering a rehearsed jab about Tory mismanagement over the past decade, but the laugh fell fallow and the jab missed. This wasn't about the past anymore. This was about Labour, her Labour falling apart under weight of its own contradictions. And somewhere in the background of it all was Keir Starmer, absent, silent, and conspicuously invisible. His absence spoke volumes. Here was his depth, a beating that was as much a Boothist leadership as it was about her competence. And yet he was nowhere to be seen. There was a choice and an obviation. By leaving her to face the storm alone, Starmer could claim plausible deniability if things went bad. But in doing so, he also made her the lightning rod for every criticism hurled at Labour that day. The cameras caught it all. The raised eyebrows from the opposition, the whispered aides on the Labour benches, the grim satisfaction of a Tory MP who knew he had just cornered his prey. This wasn't just political point scoring. Feckerman's air grew heavier as the Tory MP, now fully in command of the battlefield, circled for another strike. Every word delivered was designed to bruise, and a very bruise seemed to deepen the cracks already running through Labour's armour. He moved on to the heart of the matter. The trust deficit. The British people, he said, fixing Rayner with a stare that cut glass, were told this Labour government would be different. They were to allude there would be honesty, fiscal discipline and unity. But in just a few short months, what have we seen? Internal rebellions, soaring council tax bills and a welfare plan. So flawed your own MPs are begging you to scrap it. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't spat, it was said almost sadly, as though he and somehow that pity stung worse than mockery. Rayner's retort came quickly, too quickly. An impassionate spiel about building an economy that works for everyone, lifting people out of poverty and repairing the damage of Toryism. It was boilerplate, and it showed she was leaning on the old reliable slogans that had carried her through rough interviews before. But the problem was the slogans had no teeth, because the accusations weren't abstract, they were backed up by own policies, numbers, and rebellions. And in politics, you can't spin away from your own paperwork. The Tory MP knew this. That's why every time she opened her mouth, he calmly reached into his folder, pulled out an damning statistic or Labour quote, and read it aloud like a prosecuting barrister presenting Exhibit C. Each one landed like a hammer on stone. It went on. The more obvious it became that Rayner wasn't just defending against the Tories, she was defending against the shadow of her own leader. Starmer's absence was a spectre in that chamber, hanging over her responses like a silent judgment. Every question about Labour's credibility was in reality a question about his credibility too. But Trina couldn't throw him under the bus, not publicly, not here. So she did what corned politicians always do, she deflected. She talked about Tory failures, global challenges, and the resilience of the British people. But with each deflection, the Tory MP smiled wider, because every dodge was a concession that she couldn't defend their charges head on. And then came the moment. The gallery will replay again and again the emotional crack. The MP asked her with that same steady.com/deputalder, how can you stand here today, look the country in the eye, and tell them you're protecting working people when the truth is, you're making them pay more for less? The words hit like a stone through glass. For a split second, her composure faltered. Her eyes glistened, not the rolling tears of a breakdown, but the sharp sting of anger and frustration that comes when you are trapped, cornered, and out of exits. She gripped the edge of the dispatch box a little tighter, her voice catching just slightly as she insisted Labour wasting up for the many. Not the few, but that small crack, that momentary trauma was enough for the Tory side to sense they had her exactly where they wanted her. The chamber buzzed with a strange electric tension. This wasn't the Angela Rayner people were used to, the firebrand who could trade blows without blinking. This was someone under siege fighting to keep her footing as the ground shifted beneath her, and as Tory MP went in for yet another Labour's record-breaking tax burden. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from her own MPs, the silent prayer that she'd find some miraculous counterpunch, but not. Instead, she doubled down on blaming the previous government, weaving a story about cleaning up a decade of Tory mess that, while true in part, sounded tired against the freshness of her opponent's attacks. Meanwhile, the absence of Star had gone from a subtle shadow to a glaring headline in the making. The optics were lethal, the loader nowhere to be found while his deputy was being dismantled in public view. And those optics would feed the narrative the Tories had been building for months that Labour's so-called Newton was just the same old chaos, only with different faces. The Tory MP knew it, the press gallery knew it, and judging by the stony faces on the Labour benches, they knew it too. Rayner might have survived the exchange in a technical sense, but the real battle over perception, trust, and leadership was slipping away from her minute. By now, the session had stopped feeling like a debate and started feeling like a slow, methodical enriffing. Every jab from across Theo landed clean, and every attempted counter from Rayner seemed to the Commons' air. The murmurs grew louder, the glances between Labour map sharper. This wasn't just about one bad day at the dispatch box. It was a booth-creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, their leadership team wasn't built to withstand the storm that was coming, and the Tory MP, with their patience of a creditor, was making Surrey. The whole country saw it happen in real. By the time the Speaker called Thephanol exchanges, the atmosphere in the Commons felt less like a debate and more like the closing act of a well-rehearsed sign of Sushan. The Tory MP, still calm and collected, delivered his parting shot with the precision of someone who knew the soundbite would echo on every nutional before the day was over. Deputy Elder, the country asked for competence, honesty, and unity. What he got from Labour's division, broken promises, and the biggest tax GRA. If this is your idea of putting working people first, God help them when you put 'em second. The words landed like a hammer blow, drawing sharp intakes of breath from both sides of the chamber. Even a few on the Labour benches couldn't help but glance at each other as if silently asking, how do we even spin this? Angela Rayner, her voice now the weary tone of someone who has been boxed into every corner imaginable, tried one last time to relive room. She spoke of Labour's values, of fighting for fairness, of refusing to let the Conservatives rewrite history. Her hands gripped the dispatch box tighter than ever, her words coming faster, almost as if speed could make them hit harder. She reminded their chamber of rising wages, better schools, and investments in the NHS, but in the context of what had just unfolded, it felt less like a victory speech and more like a lifeboat in the middle of a sinking ship. Noble in spirit, but helpless against the tide, the Tory MP leaned back, satisfied, while murmurs of approval rolled across his side of the chamber. On the Labour benches, the applause for Rayner's closing words was hesitant, thin, and in some cases entirely absent. It was the sound of a party clapping out of obligation, not conviction. The optics were disastrous. Their deputy leader had been cornered, dismantled, and left standing alone in front of the nation without a single decisive win in her exchanges. The cameras zoomed in on her face, tired eyes, clenched jaw, the faintest trace of a glare aimed at the opposite venters. It was the look of someone who knew she'd been beaten today, and beaten badly. And where was Karma? Still absent, still silent. His absence had become more than just a tactical choice. It was now a political statement in itself. He had allowed his deputy to take the full brunt of the assault, perhaps to shield himself from direct damage. But in doing so, he had let the narrative form that Labour's leadership was split not just in strategy, but in solidarity to the watching public. It looked like the captain had abandoned at the bridge while the ship was under attack, leaving his first mate to weather the storm alone. And the Tory MP had driven that image home with every barb, every statistic, every reminder that Labour's problems weren't just inherited, they were self-inflicted. Ask session closed. The press gallery wrapped it into quiet, urgent chatter. Reporters were already typing the headlines. Rayner crumbles in Commons. Tories rip into Labour's tax hikes. Star missing in action. Outside the chamber, the clips would be shared, replayed, and dissected across social media, each replay making the blows land harder. And somewhere in a quiet corner of Westminster, Labour strategists were already drafting the damage control, knowing full well that no amount of spin could fully erase the image burned into the public mind. Angela Rayner, flustered, cornered, and alone facing down an opponent who had clearly won the day. The truth is, this wasn't just another bruising PMQs. It was a warning shot. a signal to Labour's opponents and perhaps even to Labour's own restless MP that the leadership team is vulnerable, that the cracks are visible, and that with the right pressure those cracks can be forced wide open. For the bruises from today will heal, but the perception damage may linger far longer. For Starr, his absence will be remembered just as vividly as anything said in the chamber, and for the Tory MP who orchestrated his political demolition, the victory will taste especially sweet. Not just because he embarrassed Labour on Livet, but because he made it clear that when the pressure mounts, Labour-sized war doesn't need the Tories to ignite it. Labour, as ever, is perfectly capable of tearing itself apart. And so, dear viewer, the curtain falls on this week's Commons clash, leaving behind echoes of sharp words, stunned silences, and the unmistakable smell of political blood in the water. Angela Rayner may walk out of the chamber today, but the shadow of this encounter will follow her and her party for a long, long time. Their question now is not whether Labour can survive the Tories' attacks, but whether they can survive each.